Okay, we'll get started. Good morning, everyone, and happy holidays to everybody. Appreciate you being here this morning. And Nally, if you will, call roll. Yeah, I got to. Okay.
Morning, everyone. Secretary James LeBlanc.
Here.
Senator Dan Clater.
Here.
Honorable John F. DeRosier. Mr. Scott Payton.
Here.
Mr. Norris Henderson.
Here.
Judge Rusty Knight.
Here.
Representative Terry Landry. Representative Walt Leger. Senator Danny Martini. Mr. Ken Barnes.
Here.
Judge Robert Morrison.
Here.
Mr. Stephen Toops. Miss Sarita Stibe. Sheriff Gerald Turlich. All right. I don't believe we have a actual quorum, but oh no, we do. We're good.
So on the minutes, I apologize. We don't have the minutes from the last meeting. We're going to get those out as soon as this is over to you guys, and probably do something online with you on getting the minutes adopted. So the first on the list is this morning is Thomas. If you would come up and kind of give us an update on the savings over the last couple of years. And I think do we have? Is it on the?
Yeah, Nicole, are you going to PowerPoint?
Good morning. Thomas Bickham, Undersecretary for the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. I think at the last meeting, we were kind of in between recognizing the actual savings and then going before the legislature to get that money carried forward. The numbers really have not changed since that last time. As a whole, last year, the criminal justice reinvestment saved about, in total, $17.8 million. Of that, 30% reverted back to the state, which is roughly 5.3. 20% went to the Office of Juvenile Justice, and I think Secretary Bush is here to kind of give you an update on what that money is going to be used for later. And then the remainder of it, the remaining 50%, 30% of that 50% went to grants, 20% to the LCLE Victim Services, and the remaining 50% of that 50% remained with DOC for investments. And I think you can see the numbers up there. It was a really good meeting with JLCB. I think that the members of the committee have become more comfortable with how this process works, and that we have to prove we have to save the money first before we can carry forward and expend it for the next year. As far as an update on current year savings, as of the end of November, we are predicting a lot less this year. I think we're starting to see, we were way ahead of Pew initially, and I think we're kind of evening out to what Pew had predicted at that time. We're predicting about $6.7 million in savings this year, which is, significantly less than the 17.8. But I think we expected that, and I think at some point you're going to start to see these investments take hold too, and I think you'll see a second decrease similar to what we saw previously. And that's just kind of digging into the numbers a little bit. And with that,
So,
Mr. Chairman,
so just a reminder, y'all have the PowerPoint is in front of you, so that, I mean, his report was on page 4, and I should have said that to begin with. It makes it a little easier for you to, I have a hard time with the monitors up there, but you have that in front of you. And, I guess, the one thing that we need to add, I guess, in all this is that the money stays with us. We don't want to forget that the money gets carried forward from year to year. We don't lose the funding. It's not like a grant, and I don't know. I know we've talked about that at different times, but whatever amount we end up with in savings is the budget that we have to allocate out to the reinvestment strategies. So it's not like it's going away. Okay. Anything else? Any questions, anyone? I don't see. No lights. Thomas, thank you. So we're going to go out here. I think James, you have to be at another meeting, and we're going to kind of let you give us a update on Office of Juvenile Justice. And that
He actually has a,
Yeah, he has another?
Yeah.
Okay, that's in your handout too. He's handed out another.
Good morning. James Bush, Deputy Secretary for the Office of Juvenile Justice. Want to give a real quick overview. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and kind of give you an idea of where we're doing with the reinvestment funds relative to juvenile services. One of the things that we were fortunate to be able to get these funds at this time was we looked at this as a way to support a big initiative of the administration, and that was the raising the age of the juvenile court jurisdiction to 17. A lot of y'all know that that's happened with nonviolent offenders and will be happening with violent offenders coming up on July 1 of 2020. So we had a lot of community meetings, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 15. Went out and really talked to a lot of law enforcement, a lot of service providers, stakeholders, and got a lot of input. And what really resounded was a lot of those local stakeholders wanted programs that deal with kids on the front end before they actually get into the system. And we saw that as a positive, not only from a standpoint of the amount of money that we were receiving, but also from the ability to do a lot of wide-ranging programming from the standpoint of not being kind of held down to one or two programs that were really expensive, but how do we maximize resources? How do we partner with locals who may already have a program that can expand it with a little bit more money to do some additional services for juveniles? So just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, and that's just our mission, kind of vision to keep kids out of the system. But one of the things that really resounded was the need for some type of diversion programs. And those programs are usually generally kids that are either first or second offenders, nonviolent, and it really keeps them out of the system. It's an ability for them to provide some kind of resource, some kind of accountability, while they still don't have to actually go into the court system and be formally charged and formally adjudicated. And a lot of these are programs that are grassroots in nature, DAs, local providers. We've had city courts apply and get these programs. So again, we require them to be evidence-based in some way that really shows that these are effective programs, and also that from a data standpoint, we really want to see. We just don't want to see number of kids served. We want to see an impact of the number of kids that they're going to court. So what we didn't want to happen was widen the net and actually see more kids coming into the system just to receive the service. But how are they keeping kids out of the actual system? So just to give you an idea of diversion programs, we funded right at 1.9 million. We had 3.6 was our total, and that just gives you an idea of the number of contracts we awarded, the potential youth served, and the parishes that it's going to cover. One of the things that we were glad at the end of the day, I think we were able to touch through one of the other programs over half of the parishes in the state. So, and that was one of the things that really resounded as we went out, especially in the rural areas. There was no programs, no access to detention or any type of diversion. So we were glad that we got a lot of those areas like a Morehouse, Lincoln, Richland, Grant Parish to come forward and put out give us a proposal and really want to do some type of programming for these kids. The second was an alternatives to detention. One of the things that's a big need right now, especially as we move toward raise the age, is the lack of juvenile detention. A lot of parishes are having to drive kids across the state to find a detention bed. Even some of the more urban areas who have a detention center are running into space issues. So, like I said, as we went out and had those community meetings, we saw that as a definite need to provide some funding. You know, we knew with the amount of money we were getting, we wouldn't be able to provide a detention service, but how could we do something on the short term to give them some alternatives to detention, where that kid that may be on the fence as far as needing a detention bed, they may have an alternative such as home incarceration or electronic monitoring, something along those lines. So One of the things that we did require, again, evidence-based, wanted some type of screening tool, which they all had to submit to be able to show, there's a, an objective process of how they're trying to determine who gets an alternative to detention and who actually goes into detention. And also from an outcome standpoint, we want to really see the numbers from they're keeping kids out of detention with these programs. It's not an addition, but a supplement to what they're trying to do. And again, just to kind of give you an overview, we funded right at $1.8 million relative to those programs, and it kind of gives you the number of contracts and the parishes that those cover. Again, we were very pleased with the number of responses that we did get. And again, the detention, alternatives to detention, and the diversion, we were able to cover, fairly large parts of the state. We were able to get the programs up and going on November 1st, which we were very pleased we were able to do that. One of the things that we didn't know how much we were getting until I think it was mid-September. So we had already kind of started that, our application process, getting input from the community long before we knew how much money we were going to receive. And it really actually had our application, a request for application out in the communities, advertised. We were working with the Office of State Procurement to make sure we followed all the rules and all the requirements well before we actually got the amount of funding that we were going to receive. So we were glad that we were able to get those programs up and going relatively quickly, and that's why I said we have them, as far as a November 1st start date. One of the things with the small amount of contracts, we wanted to focus on programming that could be ramped up relatively quickly, not a program that needed to go renovate a building and purchase vehicles and train 15 staff. These are programs that are, they may have, I think, just to give you an example, one program had electronic monitoring for adults. They are paying another deputy overtime to expand that to be able to do it with some juveniles that may need that type of supervision. So again, that's how we were kind of ramp those up as quickly as possible. I believe that's all I have. If y'all have any questions, concerns, or comments.
We have Senator Claytor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know most of the people that are, well, not most, everybody that's participating in this room knows this subject matter very well, and I don't ever know who's actually watching it on the internet or paying attention to it otherwise. But we all have different personal experiences in this field. But I want to remind those that, like early steps in education, that how we spend our money there, the money that we spend here will pay unknown and untold dividends. When I was a young prosecutor, had left that office, Judge Muley over in juvenile court appointed me on a case, and I was disappointed that he had done that to me, and showed up in juvenile, where it wasn't really a place that I spent a bunch of time, was trying a case, what appeared to be a pretty bad character, and it looked like I was going to win the case, and we ended up negotiating a plea to a child in need of supervision, and probation and parole stood up at that time, and they said, we'll put our best officer on this guy, and we're going to get him the help that he needs. And that was pretty much the end of the case. 20 years later, I opened my mail, and there's a letter from this guy, and it's a picture of his high school diploma, picture of him in his Marine Corps uniform, and a picture of him with his wife and baby daughter, asking me to say thanks to Judge Muley and to the people that were involved, that he had reached out to me on that. So that would be great if those are we had all those stories, and they don't get publicized much. So, but our job, as I understand it, is what you're talking about there, is to make sure that we don't get lost by good intentions, and that we stick with the evidence-based and who is actually successful. Because I love all the, I don't mean it in a derogatory term, do-gooders that want to help, but the best intentions can't really get you there. That you have to have the evidence-based side and the people that know what they were doing, and our probation parole people are great resources on that, and we have great people within the juvenile justice department. But I don't want to get lost on good intentions, and can't emphasize enough that we really need the people with the skills to do it. The folks with the good intentions can be trained and learn and give us support, but in our fever to do good in this area, I don't want us to ever lose sight of that. And the only reason that I got that letter 20 years later of this kid in his Marine Corps uniform is because we had good people on it and helping this young man to a successful conclusion. So, and it may, probably not the last time I punched my mic in here, but it may be the last time I've punched my mic in this building. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and appreciate the work you do.
Thank you. And that's one of the things, as we get into some of the rural parishes, we knew we had to invest some in capacity, because the training piece is a vital piece to making sure we get that fidelity to that evidence-based programming. So one of the things that we did include, and we knew we were going to have to, is how do we build that expertise? How do we build that capacity so they are providing not the do-gooder, feel-good type program, but programs that are actually effective. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't want to lose sight of that.
Yes, sir.
Ken?
Hey, thank you for the work that your office has done so far. My question will be, is there any work directly with the juvenile courts, or is there any funding or something that juvenile courts that may be interested? The reason why I ask is because a couple juvenile courts have approached me and they're interested in being involved with this justice reinvestment as much as they can be.
Yeah, and part of what we did when we went to the meetings around the state, we did invite the juvenile courts. One of the things that we required within the context of our applications is that they have that support of the local court for their program. So that came in different ways, either through a letter or through some type of agreement. But if you have them, I'll be glad to talk to them. We did these on a one-year basis because not knowing what that funding looks like from year to year, and also having new programs that may or may not work out as being effective that we may have to move on from.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at doing something again relatively, probably in the middle of I'd say March, April, to be ready for the middle of the year, June, July, to either refund these, look at what's working, not working, and do some new ones. And if you have some courts that really are interested, we'd be glad to sit down and talk to them, go over what the requirements are, and just keep them updated on the process and when things are going to be done. But we tried to make sure that we don't want to have an alternatives to detention program and the court not be on board with. So that would not be of benefit to anyone if the court's going to put a kid in detention anyway, even if they don't. We have this program funded. I don't know if that makes sense or not. But.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And what I'd like to do is get with you afterwards, just get your contact information so I can link you with those courts.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Judge Knight?
Well, Mr. Bush, thank you first for the work that you guys have done. And I echo what Senator Clater said regarding evidence-based practices. It may feel good, but if it doesn't work, we really need to be directing our resources. I think one of the things that I'm just going to, caution about is that with the change in numbers as we see is going to be happening this year, the numbers are going to look very different for next year than they do for this year. One of the things that's going to bring into play is the necessity to analyze where do we cut back and how do we continue with the programs that are working. So to the extent that you can build in a sustainability piece for the programs that are coming in, I know in my other life where I do reentry court, we now have a tripart funding program going right now. So that we can continue to operate at the levels we're operating at. So to the extent we can encourage these programs to immediately begin seeking some additional funding sources, I think we're going to see some cutbacks next year that are going to make us cut out some programs that may be very good. And so I realize that's not something you can do. It's something you can simply encourage them to do.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just one comment from my perspective, I guess. And here in the last month or so, I've had the opportunity to visit Crystal Ray School here in North Baton Rouge that was very interesting to see what they're doing there, and it's a private school. The thing that I'm I guess learning more than anything else right now on the how do we address the issue that was brought to my attention in touring our prisons with Commissioner of Higher Ed actually and John White on where we lose these kids, and it seems to be fifth and sixth grade seems to be a consensus of that's where we're losing them. We now have families of the incarcerated group that I meet with on a quarterly basis, and we're hearing from the moms and people that are involved in this and the children, and we actually have a teacher who has a husband that's incarcerated that's involved, and that we. Children with incarcerated parents is something that we really need to try to focus in on, and because they are embarrassed, whatever the case might be. But we really need to concentrate on that area, and just to bring that, James, as we move forward with some of this, I really believe that if we're going to do this right and really start getting on the front end of this, we need to start thinking about where we do this, maybe even training for teachers to help them understand with incarcerated parents, how do you deal with a child with an incarcerated parents? And what I heard is that they tend to group with each other in the school. If they have incarcerated parents, they start talking to each other and they have something, in common. And so we really need to think about that as a group and how do we approach that. And I throw that out, James, for you maybe as we move forward. I'm excited about what I saw at Crystal Ray. And I asked them that question, do you know how many kids here have incarcerated parents? And they didn't have any idea, but they know they have them. So we really need to start thinking about that. So I just wanted to make that comment. Other than that, the board is clear. James, thank you for being here. I know you have to.
That's fine. I appreciate y'all letting me go first. And if y'all have any questions or need any other
Yeah,
information,
and
just
if you
let me
would,
know.
leave your card and we'll give it to Ken
Sure.
so he'll
Yes,
get
sir.
that.
All right, thank y'all again.
All right, thanks. Okay, Mr. Kraft, Jim, want to come up, LCLE on the crime victim side of this? Yeah, another handout. It's a handout, individual handout. There you go. Has a state seal on it. All right.
Good morning, Jim Kraft, Executive Director of the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement. For this year, we received a total of $3,488,453 for our fiscal year 1920 for victim services programs in the state. We received those funds from DOC on October 3rd, 2019. We continue to put funding this year, another $750,000 towards establishing a capital area family justice center. We've seen some progress there. A lot of paperwork involved, a lot of things a lot of hoops you have to jump through before you can get operational. But they have elected a board of directors. They have completed a search for an executive director and are in the process of doing interviews with the finalists. And they have secured a building on Government Street, which has to be renovated. And so demo has taken place on that building. An HVAC system has been installed in that building. And so next will be the architects and the contractors getting together to make it a usable space. So they continue to work towards getting that center open. The goal is to coordinate support services from all of these partner agencies that provide services to families in need. And so they're working diligently towards accomplishing that goal. We hope to maybe see them open maybe this year, in 2020, I mean. So The next item is the Crime Victims Reparations Board. We continue to work towards paying down the backlog of cases and claims that are pending. A lot of the people, we always pay our victims first, so they get the priority. But when additional funds are available, we pay the service providers, hospitals, doctors, funeral homes, a lot of the people who provide the services to these victims. And so this year we dedicated $1.6 million. We think that will take care of the backlog from 2017, 2018. And we just since we've received the money, we've processed over 260 claims and paid out $633,000 in justice reinvestment funds to victims of crime. So we are pretty confident that that $1.6 million will be spent prior to June 30th. It won't be necessary to carry over any funds. We didn't have any carryover in the crime victims reparations funding last year. All of the funds were spent towards victims of crime. The last award is been put on hold, but we tried this project last year. There was some difficulty in getting it off the ground, and that is to develop an interface with every clerk of court in the state. And the clerk of courts don't all use the same computer system or have the same technology provider, and so it's difficult. You know, we're working with 2 or 3 different vendors who provide those services to the clerks, and the quotes we have received so far exceed the amount of funding that's available to establish that interface. But what that would do is allow any court to be able to pull up the victim notification form that victims complete to be notified of hearings, bail, being established, transfers of inmates and whatnot. So the first quote exceeded the funding, so we have not expended any funds at this time. But what we did this year, different from last year, is that we asked for additional program proposals to be brought to us, and I don't want to use the term shovel-ready, but those programs were viewed, and we selected 2 as a backup in the event that one of these projects can't be accomplished. And so as soon as we know whether or not we get a negotiated price, a better price to do the interface with the clerks, we have those 2 programs on standby that we could fund if necessary. And both of the proposals, the people who made the proposals, the nonprofits, have assured us that they could spend the money by June 30th of 2020. And then last is we have set aside administrative fees, about $340,000. That's for implementation, program management, equipment, operating supplies, and grant monitoring. On the large expenditures that are outside of the Commission on Law Enforcement, they aren't in-house projects, we treat it just like we do a federal grant. They're under the same requirements, and so they have to go through monitoring and be enrolled in our e-grant system and file quarterly reports regarding expenses and payments and whatnot. So that's where we are on our on that amount of money that we received for this year.
Judge Morrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little bit conflicted in the comments I'm going to make here, and I want to make sure that I am not directing these to Mr. Kraft at all. What I'm conflicted about involves the crime victims reparation allocation, and the conflict that I have is, number one, I understand the importance of that, achieving that goal. The conflict that we have is in another aspect of either enacted or still pending JRI issues, and that has to do with the ability of the courts to attempt to implement and enforce restitution to victims in these cases, which possibly could be severely limited by some of the things that are floating out there. We're still trying to negotiate some of those. The other side of my conflict is that I feel the importance of the expenditure of these funds, and particularly given the fact that, as has been pointed out in prior discussions, that the anticipated future funding is not going to equal anywhere close to what we have been able to achieve so far with this. And it gets to be a matter of priorities. And my vision, if you will, of the real goal of the Justice Reinvestment initiative is to attempt to provide help, services, that kind of thing, in an effort to head off crime through things like pretrial diversion that was mentioned in the OJJ presentation, or to provide funding to discourage recidivism, such as the programs that judges, including particularly Judge Knight, have done with the reentry court. And I just want to point out that I don't have a solution. I just have a concern about future allocation. Where are we best going to spend a reduced amount of money, and should that be allocated more toward a crime victims reparation as opposed to the other aspects? So I know there's a lot of moving parts to all of this, but it is a concern to me, and that's all I want to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I would just point out the legislation that was passed. The commission's role in that legislation is to address victim services. So, we have to find programs and projects and we look for what will be of the most benefit, the most bang for the buck. And there are plenty of, that there's plenty of programs out there who say, man, we could use the money and we could do this, and there's a lot of great ideas. And what it comes down to is how much money is available and what we can dedicate towards accomplishing that goal. Yes, sir.
Judge Knight?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
I'm sorry, I missed you. That was Senator Clayton.
There we go. All right. And thank you, Mr. Kraft. I appreciate the good presentation this morning. I echo what Judge Morrison says, and I guess because we're all in that real world, that we have a very finite number of resources and almost an infinite number of needs, allocation is going to become more and more of a challenge. And I commend you for the work you've done to this point, and I know you'll continue to. My heart kind of goes back to my mom's employment as chief deputy clerk of Washington Parish when I was growing up. That's one of the reasons I'm a lawyer now. And so are Odyssey and COT the two primary providers in the state for internet-based services for the clerks, or do we have a number of others?
There are, COT has the most. COT has 23 clerks in the state.
23.
Yeah, Odyssey I think has, I want to say maybe 15. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
we've dealt with COT, and the problem is that the software provider who developed the electronic version of that victim notification form is APRA Safety, and so they're trying to work out with COT to do that interface.
Mm-hmm.
What we would like to see is that when a judge walks into the courtroom and he asks a clerk, has a victim been notified and has a victim know about this hearing, that clerk could get on that computer and automatically pull up the date of the notification, whether it was made by text, email, cell phone call, whatever the process of communication was, in the hopes that the victim got proper notice of the hearing. And when you start talking about doing that interface and then you're dealing with different software providers, it's a pretty challenging task.
I won't bore you with some of our transitional stories having gone live in the last year. How far apart are we? We have $758,000 in funding. What are the numbers we're hearing that it would take to make that happen?
Well, the numbers that we were given was 500 and something thousand to, do the workup and do the interface. The problem is the ongoing annual maintenance quote that we received puts us out of the ballpark, because we know that this funding's not going to last forever.
Correct.
And so we're not sure that the commission would be able to come up with federal funds to be able to pay the annual user fees.
And what are those in the neighborhood of?
400,000 a year.
They're wildly proud of their services. I tend not to be politically correct, so I apologize if I sound like that's expensive.
Thing when we saw those numbers, but the other thing is that on the federal side, VOCA funding is being reduced.
Yes, it is.
Starting next year. So some of our programs are going to be, really, really on the edge, and that's why we're trying to get Family Justice Center going and all of those things. But this is the second year in a row we've tried to work with the vendors and the clerks to get that interface, and just that's a lot of money.
It is, and I very much appreciate your update on that. One of the possible sources of relief perhaps could be the Clerks Association, and having just renegotiated all of my service contracts with my service providers, when you have decreased funds, you sometimes have to have frank conversations.
Yep, I agree.
Senator Clay, did I miss you?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 quick points on the notification side. I would assume and hope that you're working closely with the district attorneys and the District Attorneys Association. When I was a prosecutor, if my victim didn't know what was going on in the file, Mr. Connick would fire you. So the DAs, I assume, are working hard to keep the victims notified, and I'd like to see and know that you're working together. But I'm backtracking a little bit into the legislation of what we did here, which was, this was a big jump for the Louisiana legislature to go down this path. And a big selling point to people that were on the fence, that the visceral reaction when you're dealing with criminal justice is, let's lock the offender up forever and let's take care of the victims. And we all understand that. And so if we're not taking care of the victims well enough through this program, it's going to cave in and fall in and go away. And so I don't want us to lose sight of that. And as a legislator, that I am term limited, but if you were sitting in front of me in committee, when I look at your Victims Reparation Board line item, I want to know what these people were being compensated for. Things that we heard on the floor was simple stuff like burying a family member. Poor people that the best they could do was cremation, and $600 to get them cremated and buried. I think people, as a legislator, we're think that's right and just to be able to help the family get their family member buried, but I need more detail on that. And people want to know where our money is going on that. I appreciate, for the purpose of this hearing, you're giving me a line item, but how are we helping these victims? Because most of the legislature doesn't care too much about what's happening further down the line. They want to know that the victim has never been lost sight of. And I don't think anybody in here is losing sight of the victim, but the sales part on let's eliminate recidivism and make better citizens out of these other people is second to most people. So I want to be sure that we're giving the legislators the right information so they can make proper decisions on that. And I can't emphasize that enough that if the legislature loses faith in this program, we'll be going in a different direction on it. So we have to deliver what we said we're going to deliver, which we have been delivering savings. Let's. I'm not chiding anybody. I'm not saying we have, but we can never, ever lose sight of the victims and their families. So thank you.
Yes.
And certainly I would agree with that, Senator. And you know, as we move forward with the details, I think that's important. I really do. I think if we know where the money's going and we can talk about that in committees. And I would remind everybody, because the money stays with us. The money does not go, I mean, look, you can get cut anytime, and we all know that if you've been involved in the budget process. But this money does not go away. So I'll remind y'all of that. It doesn't go away. It stays with us. It stays in our budget unless somebody comes in and cuts it out of budget. And I agree. If we don't keep the victims involved in this, we can find ourselves hurting down the road. So we definitely need to keep that as a focal point of what we're doing, because it's important. It's definitely important. And anything that we do, we have to keep them involved. There's no question.
And Secretary, I'm not saying that we have lost sight of the victims, but
No.
they are our partners and their families are our partners, and we have to never lose sight of that.
With the different funding mechanisms we've received over the last 2 years for sexual assault victims, that account is pretty healthy, and we're able to pay those when the claims are filed and processed and investigated. Those victims are paid right away, and we can pay them in full every month. The other victims who have suffered, injuries, hospitals, incurred bills, for hospital stays and doctor visits and lost wages and all of those different things, as well as to the families of some of these people who are homicide victims. In fact, yesterday I signed about 75, 80 checks payable from the last crime victims reparations meeting, and a number of those checks were to funeral homes, to pay funeral homes for, being able to compensate them for, burying
The victims.
the victims.
And I appreciate that, and as the Secretary points out, that nothing is ever safe, but you're welcome to replay this part for my future legislators when they come to cut that, to say, you mean you're going to tell the victims we can't bury their family member? There's some things that even legislators won't cut if they understand what it's for. So
That's the reason our goal is to get that backlog paid down, get rid of all 2017, 2018 claims. With the money last year, we paid 2015 and 2016 claims. We caught those up. And this year, we're working on 17, 18, and some of 19 that depending on the funding and what source you can take it from, we don't always have the funds to pay the victims that particular month. Sometimes we have to wait.
Well, I appreciate it, and we as a group know that if they don't get restitution through this program, for the most part, we're dealing with people that are of very limited means. They're not going to be able to sue them in civil court for that, and they're never going to see that money, that you can't get blood from a turnip. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Barnes?
My question was.
No, hold on, Norris. We got one before you. That's all right. I'm gonna get you.
Mr. Kraft, thank you for your work that you've done. I'm going to ask you questions on two different topics. One, dealing with the clerical court system that you discussed earlier, and since Senator Claytor just ended off on the crime victims, I'm going to go back to that. What's the order of payment? Is it the furthest back the crime occurred, that this victim suffered this crime, or is it based on when they put in the application?
When they put in the application, and the claims investigator, there's a claims investigator in each parish. The claims investigators are responsible for getting to applications to us. We review it to make sure it's complete, if we're missing any documentation like bills and whatnot, and then that's set on the next available meeting agenda for our board, Crime Victims Board, to review the claim and vote on. And then after that vote is taken, within a few days, the checks are cut and mailed out to the victims.
Great. My questions, next question is, how are we notifying victims about the ability to apply to this?
Most victims are notified through their parish sheriff's office. And that's where most of our claims investigators work. They work for the parish sheriffs. Some are in district attorney's offices. But the notification, we even have, funeral homes and hospitals who are aware of the program, and sometimes they tell the victim about it. But mostly through our claims investigators in each parish.
And through your experience, have you seen that this is being, the people that are applying kind of match up to the demographics or the populations across the state? Or do you see that maybe there's one area where there's a lot of applicants and some areas where they're not? My reason for asking is there something that we can do to better inform people about this?
I'm not sure of the demographics regarding the entire state. I know that, and Bob, you maybe can speak to that. Bob Wirtz is our post-program and CVR director.
Bob Wirtz with the Commission on Law Enforcement Training Manager. There are certain parts of the state where we do not receive certain types of claims. For example, the number of domestic violence claims that we receive from North Louisiana is very small. We're not sure why that is the case. We think that geographically, when you look at the offices who are very active in submitting applications to us across the board, that averages pretty regularly. But like in the North Delta, the Monroe area, and the Shreveport area, we don't receive as many claims for assistance with domestic violence as we do in South Louisiana. Now, we know from the other side of our house that does the uniform crime analysis reports, we know the crimes are pretty consistent across the board. And we made some efforts to find out why we're not receiving those types of claims. I don't have an answer for you because I don't have a clear-cut answer. In certain other areas, we don't have the same number of sexual assault claims as well either. Same areas, same geographical areas. So in Northwest Louisiana, South Louisiana, pretty much we're getting a fairly even distribution of applications for assistance with sexual assault victims. That's not true in Northeast Louisiana. We're starting to see a little increase, but the numbers are going for us off the charts. And I've said as much in the budget hearings over in the Senate last year. We can't figure out why there's such a disparity, but the number of claims that we're getting is far exceeding the basis on crimes that are committed. And we're not sure if we're just having more forensic medical exams being done, or in fact there are more sexual assaults than we ever thought were actually occurring, but now that they're being documented through the medical service providers, we're getting a clearer picture than what we normally would have received through just reports of crimes. In other words, somebody could go in for a forensic medical exam of victim of sexual assault, but not report that. And then there's a gap of that. And we've known that for a long time. Now those numbers are starting to get a little closer because we've got access to figures on both sides. So in response to your question, there's a variance in certain types of crimes and claims to compensate the victims in different parts of the state. Not sure why that is the case, whether the victims themselves are not taking advantage of the program itself, or there's some other reason. I mean, you've hit on something we've known about for a long time. It's just that we don't necessarily have a solution other than providing the benefits and making sure that they're available to anyone who applies.
Certainly. So, well, thank you for the work that you've done so far. And I know you may not know what's causing it, but some ways that we may be able to fix that is possibly by contacting different hospitals in those areas that aren't reporting as much, get that information to them. Speaking to the sheriffs in different locations where we are getting a lot of reports, see what they're doing, take those best practices to other areas. Try to pick up what's working some places and bring it other places. But we'll like to continue that dialogue a little bit into the future. To jump into the issues with the clerk of court system that you have, I know that we've been in meetings about the clean slate. Clean slate is legislation created by Representative Ted James dealing with the automation of sealing of records of individuals post their conviction after a period of time. In those discussions, we discussed how creating of a clean slate will require a unification of our information systems and our legal systems. So with that being said, that kind of sounds along the lines of what you're talking about here, creating a system where the clerk of court is able to basically talk between the different courts. Is that a correct assessment?
Yes.
Okay, so is there a way that this clerk of court VNR interface system is something that could be wrapped into the clean slate, or is this something that should be totally separate?
I think it may have to remain separate from that, only because that's victim focused, and some of that information is confidential, and so you don't want it being shared on a system that other folks could access regarding offenders.
Certainly. Okay, well, is there any way that this system that you're having with the VNR interface could be something that includes disposition charges or even uniform commitment orders?
I don't think in that system, but we are working with the Supreme Court on the ICJIS project, which is to get judges, when a judge pulls up, whether it's this judge or this judge, what they're seeing the same thing, and that it's consistent. And that's been a major project. We've worked with the Supreme Court now for 3 years on trying to get all of the bugs, and just what you alluded to earlier, it's because all of these different jurisdictions have all of these different systems. And so it's hard to say, well, this system, there's a system that works, but you go to the clerk of court and say, we have this system and we're going to give it to you for free because we have a federal grant to cover that. And they say, I just spent, $500,000 on a new system. Where were you 6 months ago or wherever? So it's been difficult it's kind of like herding cats. It's been difficult to get everybody on the same page with regarding that matter.
And my last question, kind of what you're discussing about, we just spent $500,000 to create this system. Is this system that you're working on with VNR interface? Is that a fresh stand up, or is this kind of like a box that you're plugging and playing in?
Well, the software provider that we contract with for Lavens, the automated victim notification system, stepped up and developed this electronic version of the victim notification form, and that was due to a legislative resolution that if funding was available, let's develop this form electronically. You can still file the form manually and have it in court, but we got it developed. It's in operation in 2 parishes right now. We're piloting that program, but the next step in that was the interface, and that's kind of where we've run up against the financial wall that we've hit regarding that issue. And so we're hopeful that maybe one of the software vendors for the clerks, maybe COT or somebody, can maybe develop that system, and we eliminate the middle person.
Thank you, gentlemen, and look forward to hearing about what steps are being taken to address the disparity in reporting or applying for these victim assistance funds.
All right, Norris.
My question is, in reference to item number 2, is you identified you paid off 260 claims. What is the outstanding backlog? Do you have any idea how many people left? And the reason I ask the question is primarily because it's not so much people getting compensated, it's whether or not they're getting compensated timely.
Correct.
Because in the community that I'm from, it's kind of like this thing lingers for months and Sundays with people. The most important thing, like Senator Clay was saying, is that closure, putting the person in the ground in a respectful way. And if it lingers inside the community, sometimes in our communities, people hold bodies for like 2 and 3 weeks. And it's embarrassing to the family. And if this, compensation or these reparations is there, seem like it would be, the sooner we can get it done, the better it would be for everybody as a whole. The word is out in the community that, hey, there's access to dollars, but it takes so long to get them.
Right.
And so you got people subsidizing, with suppers and all other kind of activities, trying to raise money to bury somebody. And for folks who are struggling to do that, it's at the same time they're already dealing with something, and then this added burden of the embarrassment that I couldn't afford to do this thing in a timely fashion weighs heavy on people. So that's my question: is one, what is the outstanding backlog? And I think if we can get the backlog done, then it's easier to address as it happens, that people can be compensated.
Right. I'll speak to the second question first. We have a pretty good working relationships with mortuaries and funeral homes around the state, and many times, not all the time, but many times they will front the money knowing that, okay, there's a claim pending, I will get this money back. And so some of them have been very helpful in doing that for us, and then we, get them a check as soon as the funds become available. What's our backlog right now, number of cases,
I don't have a specific figure, but the probably upwards of between 700 and 900, perhaps. And part of that, deals with whether or not there are funds there to pay those. Now, what we have done is we have prioritized the basis on which we can make available claims. So, for example, a victim who presents a case for lost wages, we have enough funds to pay those, and we pay. Just this week the board met, not included in the figures that the chief gave you, but we paid some claims for lost wages and loss of support. We also pay for mental health expenses. As soon as they're submitted, then we pay for those right away. Then we've been tackling the backlog by hitting 2015 and 2016. We pretty much have closed out all of the backlog cases from 2016, almost all of 2017. The remaining 2017 claims, and there are about 75, will go to the next meeting in January. They've already been worked up. They're actually being copied this morning as we speak, so they will be addressed at that point. For 2018, those have been all but about 50 have been reviewed. Those will all be addressed for funeral claims at the next meeting. So pretty much we'll be caught up toward the beginning of 2019. So we prioritize those claims. The ones that are at the bottom right now are those that go to the medical providers. So our plan is we attack the claims that have expenses for which a family or a victim themselves have paid for it. Then we're going to reimburse them first. And that way, by doing that, then we can get the money in their hands. The other option we have, and we use this quite frequently, is that a victim or family can apply for an emergency award up to $500. And we can turn that around within days, depending on the amount of money we have warranted from the Treasurer's office to pay. And that's how we're paying for some of the funerals. We'll use that as what we call a down payment, if you will. We're limited by law to $500 for each emergency application. We have 27 pending this morning on which to pay out. And we use, the bulk of those are using to provide assistance to the funeral home so that we can do that. We're working on a case from West Baton Rouge, a smuggling victim who is deceased, whose mother lives in Colorado, and we are processing an emergency award to help get that victim back to Colorado. And we may get some assistance from the Justice Department because they have a special fund in Washington set up to assist for trafficking victims. We're not quite there yet. But just to give you an idea that it's a systematic approach to addressing the problem, and with the priority on addressing the needs of the victim as soon as possible, and then making an effort to get the funds to do that.
Let me say, I want to put this. Do the funeral home, for instance, if I have to bury somebody, do the funeral home contact y'all and say, hey, look, we got a family. We, We just can't keep this body on ice forever. is there some way y'all can just give them a voucher to say, or even the family a letter saying to the funeral home that we will cover the expenses for the funeral? Just trying to expedite that trauma that the person is experiencing, and then this other trauma that they're confronted with that they don't have insurance to cover, because nobody expects that these things are going to happen. They happen instantaneously, and sometimes not knowing, take some people just 2-3 days just trying to figure out what to do next.
Right.
A lot of these cases there is life insurance or burial insurance that's already there. The policy of the board is if life insurance is used to pay for the funeral, then the board's going to reimburse the beneficiary if they are in fact part of the process that was used to pay for the funeral, to reimburse that claimant for the amount up to the limits that they can for the amount of the funeral. So because otherwise, they would have been the beneficiary of the life insurance. So don't treat it like a collateral insurance. It's not treated that way. It's a benefit that literally they don't have access to for a period of time, and the board's policy is to pay that.
Thank you.
Henry Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kraft, I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Your budget for the Crime Victims Reparation Board, the $1.6 million that's listed on number 2, how much money do you receive, or do you have that in front of you, from collections from fees for those that have been adjudicated through the system?
Fines and fees?
Yes.
I don't have the dollar figure, but I can tell you that our collections for the past 2 or 3 years have been down 35%. And so that's less money that goes towards training of law enforcement officers and less money that goes towards victims of crime.
As a probation officer, we used to, at least in the 27 JDC, would assess every probationer $75 fee. So some of that money goes, is it broken up? Does it go just to?
It is. It's distributed according to, I think we get $2 off of every ticket written in the state. Every misdemeanor charge that's adjudicated through the courts, we receive $7.50. And drug charges, if the judge includes it in his language in the sentencing, we get $50 per case. And so what we've seen happen, though, is many cases are now being diverted, and so they aren't adjudicated through the court, so we don't receive any of those funds.
Okay. And I wanted to build off of what Senator Clater said about restoring victims. What is and maybe I missed it, the overall purpose of the clerk of court and the VNR interface? For example, I'm a victim of a crime in St. Landry Parish. The Sheriff's Department, I filled out the Lavins forms there. After it made it to the DA's office, we filled out Lavins forms there. I get a notice in the mail of court hearings. There's a victims coordinator at St. Landry Parish. Right. They've been in contact with us and advised us of how to apply for funds if we need it. And then post adjudication on that case, DOC has a crime victims notification. Where completed that within a couple weeks, received a nice letter with parole dates and all these other things saying that we would be notified as time progresses. How is that going to be different after the $758,000 is spent? What would I see different as a victim?
Being able to be notified primarily electronically, getting a text, getting an email, getting a cell phone call to tell you that, hey, we might have sent a letter, but here you have a hearing, and it's coming up, and this is the date, and here's what is going to be heard, and whether or not the person gets bond or is being transferred to another facility. But it's an improved way to notify victims of the status of their cases. But again, you have to have the notification form completed and filled out and on file in order to be able to do that. The other benefit to it is that judges come into court, and that's one of the first things they're going to ask that clerk. What's the notification, where are we at on that? Has the victim been notified? Is the victim here and whatnot? And so the clerk would be able to, rather than have to go through a paper file and look up for that form and look for the information on it, they'll be able to pull that information up electronically and say the victim was contacted on this date and was notified. And one of the things with the advent of, iPhones and everything else, cell phones, is that victims move. And so that address that was listed previously on that form, may not be a good address anymore, as far as the mail's concerned and that sort of thing. In fact, last year we funded probation and parole, a program for them in order for them to be able to receive assistance electronically in locating victims, where they moved to, where they, forwarding addresses and whatnot.
So currently, a victim would have to change their address via paper or go back to the sheriff's office or to the
Right.
DA's, but with this, they could do it online.
They could do it online. They could do it electronically.
And to build off of Mr. Barnes, I'm part of the Clean Slate review and have been going over that. And there's actually a group that's going to fund the majority of the software issues to get that on board. But it looks like it's going to be primarily the clerks of courts, the Supreme Court that would have access to that data, and they would already have access to the victim data as well. So would there really be a that big of a confidentiality issue with the clerks and you being able to be involved with the Clean Slate software operation?
That's something that we would have to look into further. We're willing to, based on the quotes we've been getting, we're willing to try anything to be able to get this program in place. We just think it's the final phase of the victim notification form being completely electronic, and everybody being able to benefit from that within the system.
Thank you, Mr. Kraft.
All right, Ken, back to you.
Thank you, Scott. I think that's a good idea. I think you're usually at the meetings. I think the Clean Slate meetings, we certainly should bring that up to see where we can have collaboration and reduction of costs by pooling together. Just two things I want to touch on right quick. For any victim or family member, victim or friend of a victim that may be watching this, can you explain to them the steps necessary to apply to this fund?
There are two steps that they can take if you're watching. One is to go online. And if you don't have access at home, you can go to a library and find us at lcle.la.gov. You go over to the left, you click on programs, and you click on crime victim reparations. Once that comes up, and then there will be a display, and you look for an application form. The other part is to go to the sheriff's office in the parish where the crime occurred, ask for the crime victim representative who will handle an application that's filed there. And at the same time, they can validate and verify that, in fact, it's an incident that's a crime, not an accident, and then follow up from there. And when you do, if you have expenses that you've incurred, bring copies of expenses with you so that when you fill out the application, you can do it all at one time. An emergency award application has to be done in person. You cannot access it online. And part of that is that's the process that we use to quickly verify that, in fact, an incident did occur, because the claim investigator can make a quick phone call, determine whether or not it's a valid claim, and then process it. And if necessary, and it's in a real emergency situation, a spouse is threatened to kill another partner, then we can turn that around within a day or so. And we have used that to allow a victim to literally get out of Dodge before anything major happened. That's the quick and dirty way to do it.
In a lot of our cases, the claims investigators are aware of, especially on major incidents, and they'll reach out to the victim first. And then we have some of our hospital providers and funeral home providers who also are aware of the program and will let victims know. So,
Awesome. My last question would be, Recently, there's been a lot of scrutiny towards fines and fees nationally. Also in the state, there was a lawsuit filed for fines and fees and also for bail. And those were the Kane and the Calise lawsuits, calling into question the ability for courts to receive funds through fines and fees. With that being in a threat that you may not be able to receive those funds in the future, are there any plans to supplement your funding to be able to give money towards victims when you know there will be there's been a reduction in restitution and there may be a reduction in fines and fees coming up?
Well, each year we discuss our various programs and what the funding looks like. We try to anticipate shortages. Like, for example, the VOCA program is going to be funded with less money. You know, it reached an all-time high this year, $42 million. But what we probably will do if we experience funding shortages on the state side is we'll go to the feds and see if we can increase the funding there. But all of those things, all of those programs are starting to get a little tighter. They're starting to, you know, we're starting to see, well, we're going to have to reduce the amount of money the state's going to receive this year. And, you know, if you're familiar with the Burn JAG grants, those have gone down to hardly nothing now. For our state, I think our share was $8 million this year. And when you got to split that up among 64 sheriffs and 386 police departments, not much money to go around.
Let me give you an idea of what could happen, what probably happened. So we have 1.6 million that we've set aside to pay for backlog of claims using JRI money. We have a supplemental federal grant that pays 60% of what we pay out. So if we take 60% of the 1.6 million in a year and a half, we're going to get that back and add it to on top of what we already have. So if the fines and fees are decreasing somewhat, then we're going to get this big payback. In addition, because we're paying out a large number of claims on sexual assault, we'll have the same thing as well. So for the foreseeable future, and by that I meant the next 3 to 5 years, I can see us having sufficient funding to, one, take care of any other backlog that we might have beyond this year, and two, to pay the regular claims. And as I mentioned earlier, we're not sure why, but the number of sexual assault applications we're getting continues to increase. We thought there initially would be a spike in claims once the legislation got passed in 2015. We'd have an initial spike, and then it would level off. That has not occurred. It's continued to go up, and we're not sure why. That's why I mentioned that earlier. We're concerned about it because we don't know if there's just more forensic medical exams being done or there's more sexual assaults, which would be, for us, is alarming. Why is that going up? I can't tell you the answer. That's what I mentioned earlier. But as far as funding goes, that's the foreseeable future for the next 3 to 5 years in terms of the payback that we get from these supplemental grant awards.
Thank you.
Senator Clayton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the sexual assault discussion that we just had, the other answer is maybe it's been there all along and we've just been unaware, too.
I think there's more of those cases being reported now. Maybe the process is better, and maybe the outreach that the different various SANE nurses and counselors have had maybe is encouraging to victims, and then they come forward and report those things.
And I'm looking at our group, maybe we're not the best ones to be able to offer an opinion on that. So it would be good to find further on that, but that's not what my comment's on. It's really to the policy wonks and people that are doing the clean slate thing. I would like to point one other issue out to you that perhaps it doesn't fall completely into this bailiwick, which is it's easier to expunge a serious crime than it is to work on your academic transcript. If this happened in school or happened in a college setting, and it's just as devastating as far as not being able to continue your education and things that are of that sort. So just put that in your policy wonk pipe and smoke it a little bit and see where it takes you.
Thank you. All right, Ken. Go ahead.
I promise this is my last thing I have to say. Is any of this funding being used, speaking of sexual assault, being used to process any type of sexual assault kits or anything of that sort?
Yes, the commission is involved every year. We have to publish our sexual assault survey, which is due in March of the next year for the previous year. And it gives us an idea how many kits were used, how many kits were tested, how many are untested, what's pending, and we're also involved in trying to standardize those sexual assault kits and standardize a protocol. We're working with the AG's office on that to try and get everybody on the same page regarding these kits, what's in them, and that sort of thing. And as soon as we reach that point, we have some funding, federal funding, that we're going to use, and we will supply the entire state of Louisiana with sexual assault kits.
Okay. So is there a backlog, and if there is JRI being used to address that?
Did you want to say something now?
Oh, I just was going to clarify to him it's two separate issues. So what he's speaking to related to the sexual assault, actually there was a funding source created in, I think it was 2016, specific for that.
You talking about unclaimed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so JRI wouldn't be involved.
Gambling winnings are used to pay sexual assault claims. So if somebody a lot of people win in casinos $2 or $3 and they just throw that ticket away, well, from every casino in the state that adds up, and so now our account in sexual assault claims is pretty healthy, and so we're able to pay those claims as soon as they're made, and it comes up in that board meeting. Those are paid immediately. The backlog, there were a number of kits not tested, backlogged, came out of New Orleans PD a few years ago. Louisiana State Police Crime Lab took those kits and caught them up, and so now I think last year maybe 138 kits had not been tested, but there's a theory that you should test every kit. Well, not every victim wants their kit tested. And so you have to respect the wishes of the victim. So that's why that contributes to the number of untested kits.
Thank you.
Well, the board is clear. Thank you, guys, very much.
Thank you, General.
Interesting topic. So we're going to go to slide 15, and I'd ask Jamie and Jan and Rhett to come up to talk about the DOC side, and now that's going to get us to that slide. Let me remind everybody, too, on the allocations, remember that 30% goes back to the general fund off the top, 20% off the top goes to OJJ, which leaves 50%, and then the allocation of the 30 for community incentives, 20 for victims, and 50 for DOC is allocated with that what's left of the 50%. That's the way the legislation is formed. Obviously OJJ is getting a little better boost there with the 20% off the top, which I think that's okay, and we're living with that. So I don't know how we want to start. You guys can introduce yourselves first, I guess, and then we'll talk about maybe probation and pro. You guys we'll let y'all go first, and then Rhett, you and I can kind of pull up the rear. Okay.
My name is Jan Rodriguez. I'm Deputy Director with Probation and Parole.
And Bobby Lee, Deputy Director with Probation and Parole.
So, good morning. First of all, I'd like to say that with the JRI has actually helped probation and parole in many ways. One being that our population it spiked in 2017, and since then it was 72,000, and now it's below 60,000, and it has been below 60,000 since June of this year, which is great because these are numbers that we haven't seen since prior to 2006. So with that, our average officer count went from 143 to 116. So there's a big difference. The time that they're being alleviated with not having that many clients. They're able to spend more time on the people who needs the actual help. With in ECC, earned compliance credits were a big contributor to that population drop. With the earned compliance credits, our clients are able to receive 30 days for every 30 days that they're good, and it could actually cut their time in half. So if they are performing well on supervision and they don't need our services, then they're getting off early, and we're able to, like, again, use that time to dedicate to those who do need our help. And the ones that do violate, they do get those 30 days removed, and so we use that quite a bit. In fact, just the numbers since 2017, there's been over 17,000 offenders have been actually 30 days have been taken off from so over 17,000, which contributes to about 38,000 months. So that's been a really good piece of legislation for probation and parole, and we'll continue to use that. We looked at JRI monies that were used in fiscal year 19, and part of that you just spoke with LCLE about CLEAR, and that was some money that was given back to probation and parole to use to notify or look up victims. We do pre-sentence investigations, we do pre-parole investigations, and it's important to notify and to a lot of times get these guys that we're doing pre-paroles on is many years before they ever come back in for a hearing, and so we lose contact with victims. And CLEAR has allowed us to contact victims. It's also allowed us to contact fugitives, locate fugitives. So with CLEAR, we have 130 licenses that are distributed throughout the state with probation, parole, and with DOC. And we've used that process more than 17,000 times since it's been implemented. Our DRC process is another justice reinvestment. Monies that we spent on opening day reporting centers in certain places. So we had 6 open in fiscal year 19 that serviced more than 1,000 offenders. We've opened 2 more since then. We've partnered with the parish sheriff in Lafayette, and we're opening a day reporting center there that opened in October. And GEO Group was awarded a day reporting center in Jefferson, and that just opened in December. So we look forward with ramping those up. So with that, the other thing that we're looking forward to in this next fiscal year with the funds that we will be receiving is actually partnering with a company called Pocket. And Pocket is it's an application technology-based form of supervision, so to speak. But what Pocket will allow us to do is take a person that is currently incarcerated, and 3 months before his incarceration before he's released, he will actually learn how to use an app on a iPad, or not iPad, but a tablet, or so to speak. And he will learn how to use that application and build his supervision plan, help his officer, tell his officer, like, what does he need when he gets out? Because we all know that that's the most important piece to supervision for them to be successful sometimes is the transition period from the release to supervision. So that's what we're looking to do. It will service 140 offenders, and those people will last on this application for 9 months, 3 months prior to release and 6 months post-release. And so we'll follow those offenders. We've chosen Lafayette area for this project just because we are seeing a monthly trend that they're having higher revocation rates than the rest of the state. And that's, again, we have a new DRC center there. We have a reentry center there. So we're hoping to actually have some good success there with getting those numbers down, those revocation numbers down. The other good part about Pocket is that more than one, not only can the offender put his information in, but also the courts, any provider that is servicing this person will allow them to put their information in, and everybody can be on the same page, including the offender. So we're looking really forward to see how that works out, and that should be ramping up. We're working on the contract now.
So I'm just going to explain DRCs for a minute for those of you that don't know them. DRCs are a day reporting center, obviously by what it says, but it's a special condition ordered by the parole board or the judge. It can be used for initial release, intermediate sanctions, or the last chance for an offender before he would go back to jail. So they use evidence-based practices for their programs, and they report to the DRC as determined by the staff of the DRC. They provide evidence-based programs like Thinking for a Change. They also provide referrals for substance abuse, education, in order to get their high set, and then other referrals as needed. So most importantly, we've got about 276 in the program right now across the state in these day reporting centers, and they offer them chances to continue on probation or to enhance their employment opportunities. So.
How many day reporting centers do we have now?
Currently 8.
8.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
With 2 just opening in the
yeah.
last month. So.
And let me just add just a little bit here in that, you know, it's been a real cultural shift for this group, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the leadership in probation and parole, and Pete's not here today, but he's been a big part of that with these two. You know, probation and parole is becoming a place where you can go to get some assistance, not a place to go get arrested. And that is a big change in the way we do business in this state, and I think that's a big plus. And when I hear that from the guys and the ladies that are on probation and parole directly, it means a lot. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, because that's not an easy cultural shift, and it's not a complete shift, but it's got a lot of momentum, and we're just about there. And I can't say how much I appreciate what you guys do. Rhett, you want to hit a little bit on the DOC, the prison side of reentry, if you will?
So as you're probably aware, we have Rhett Covington, Assistant Secretary for the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. As you're probably aware, you know, we have about half our population serving their time in local jails. That represents about 80% of our releases annually. And because they're deployed or they're housed in local jails throughout the state, it's very difficult to deploy services and programs to those locations efficiently when you have anywhere from 2 to over 1,000 people in each location, and those populations shift. I mean, most recently with the influx of ICE detainees that have shifted the populations in local jails. So our plan since the mid-2000s, 2008, 2009, was to create regional hubs, regional reentry centers. And those are planned kind of sort of backing into this. Those folks who are getting out, we want them to be prepared as best as possible, get them closer to home, get them the basics of our 100-hour pre-release program, 2 forms of identification, a residence plan, employment plan, sort of connect them with the family. Those programs last about 60 days, and so the amount of time that we have to touch that person and get them connected and to get them on track is very limited. But it was a start, and so with these funds, we've been able to open our last 2. We've been able to move one to cover the Lake Charles area over at Phelps Correctional Center, working with the sheriff in Beauregard Parish, and we've opened up the one in Lafourche to cover the Pie Wedge from Ascension Parish down to Terrebonne and over to St. Charles parishes. So that means that we now have coverage for regional reentry centers throughout the state. We've also used these funds to move to what I call phase 2, or a much more robust version of the reentry centers, similar to what other states have done, where we have people for longer periods of time, anywhere from 2 to 5 years out, to start providing them with additional resources, substance abuse treatment, career and technical education programs, Thinking for Change, and anger management programs, and doing family inreach and reunification to a much bigger level than just calling and saying, "Hey, can he come stay with you?" But starting to work on those family conflicts that are gonna blow up when the person gets out. So with Plaquemines, we've been able to ramp that up. Captain Williams is here today. and he's the director of that program, and they're doing a really good job of ramping up not only the numbers that we're seeing to go through, but also the amount of programs and services there. They've gone from offering carpentry programs to about half a dozen different career and technical education programs, and they continue to work with Delgado, Tulane University, Ashland University, and others to provide additional resources and opportunities for those folks who are there. So that's regional reentry centers. We're also working now to move St. Tammany to that second level. We just finished that contract recently, so they'll be ramping up to that next level over this next 6 months. And we're looking to do that in all of our Tier 1 parishes as we find locations to do that. East Baton Rouge and Caddo in particular have present challenges to us just because of the physical plant. Where do we put that number of people? How do we serve them? EBR doesn't have a location. Where do we locate this facility? So that's our challenges going forward with expanding and enhancing the regional reentry model. Additionally, back in 2014, through another investment strategy, we were able to place transition specialists in local jails. We've ramped up training for those folks with evidence-based programs like Thinking for Change. We've been able to train the trainer capacity so that we can continue to train folks in-house without having to go and continue to expend state resources to have folks trained in other venues, so that now we're able to have that program for all high and moderate risk people that we can touch with those transition specialists. That they're operating in about 38 jails right now, and of course we're in over 100 jails, so we haven't reached it yet, but we're catching the lion's share of them. We've also invested in technology. So we've dramatically expanded the ATLO partnership so that we have terminals and places not only in our regional reentry centers but in the day reporting centers. Throughout our state prisons, they've created a Chromebook option for us so that we can have mobile classrooms. We can actually take carts of Chromebooks into classrooms as we need them. The learning management system now includes a host of different resources, and right now we're working with them and the Geographic Solutions, which operates the Higher Network for Workforce Commission. We found out that they developed a corrections interface for Virginia, which sort of overlays the Higher Network and prevents the person who's accessing it from getting off of that website and updating Facebook or whatever that may be. So we're in final discussions with them right now about bringing that interface into the ATLO cloud so that we can actually help folks set up their hire account, set up a resume, get them connected with resources when they go out. We've worked with Workforce Commission, and they've stationed their staff members in 5 of our day reporting centers and connecting with our regional reentry centers to try and have that single point of contact to get these folks connected with employment opportunities as they go out the door. ATLO's also in the process of finalizing, funded by funds from this year's allocations, an application within their learning management system that they call reentryworkforce.org. It will allow employers to register a profile for themselves on the inside, our incarcerated folks to register themselves and put their resume and profile in there. It will link them based upon their search parameters. If they're looking for carpenters, it will give them all the carpenters that are going to be getting out in the next 6 months. And then it'll have a mediated email contact so they can actually send them an email, start contacting them. We would vet to make sure that it's on the up and up. We hope to eventually get to the point where we can actually conduct video interviews before they get out through this platform as well. So we're looking to try and bring that connection of community resources more into the prison experience than we've seen in the past, both with the ramping up of the regional and reentry centers and these technology pieces. This year, coming up 2020, represents 5 years of our last pre-release curriculum being in place, and about every 5 years we look at it and do an overhaul of it, so we'll be starting that process. Part of that for us is to look at off-the-shelf best practice programs that are being used in other states, such as Reentry Roadmap, Tyro Leadership. And so we brought those in to try and look and see how do we incorporate them. Or do we go to this product because it's a superior product and provides a better outcome for folks? Or do we integrate pieces of it? What is the best plan here? So that's going to help guide us down the road to improving the programs that we have out there right now. We've also funded the Move On curriculum and to bring in Train the Trainer opportunities on that. That is a gender-specific version of the Thinking for Change program specifically for women. We're trying to get more gender-specific, although our ladies tend to respond quite well and their recidivism rate is tremendously low compared to the men. We can always do better, and we tend to get a better bang for our buck because they tend to really eat it up when we give them some good stuff. So we're hoping to get them some better products that they can find more meaningful for them. On the industry-based certifications front, we have improved the number of programs that are out there now to the point where we have about 1,300 people enrolled in industry-based certification programs right now. We've seen over 640 people have secure industry-based certification certificates since we began to fund these programs through JRI. And these include everything from all the NCCER programs all the way through culinary, small engine, welding, cosmetology. And we are also looking to, we've also started this fall through the Atlo Cloud Learning Management System, not only IC3 certifications, which is basically Office systems, Microsoft Office network type stuff, but also Practice Labs, which allows, which is a partnership with a company in London that allows us to basically stream keyboard pixels to virtual servers in London so they can stand up servers and do computer coding using Python and other industry standard computer languages to learn how to code computers. But at the same time, the moment they log off, it all disappears. So they can't actually do anything with it, but it helps them to secure certification so that when they get out, they have a whole new career option for them.
And one thing I would add, and we have one light on, but one thing I would add, and as you look at this slide, the reentry centers are roughly $600,000 a year. That's the base funding, and then when we ramp it up, I think Plaquemines is 1.4 million that they have in addition to. Now remember, Plaquemines covers Jefferson and Orleans. That's a reentry, and for Plaquemines Parish. So it's a two-parish facility, if you will. The day reporting centers are about $450,000 each. So just to kind of, if you took those and added it up, that's roughly 3.75 million of that 4.4 million you see up there. Then the rest can be divided below the line. We didn't really put numbers in that, but that's basically where the numbers are. The other thing I think I want to add to what he said is, and remind ourselves, and he may have mentioned and I missed it, but you know, we discharge 17,000 people a year from our system, and 80% of those are from our parish jails. Just to remind everybody, 13,600 people are discharging out of our jails, and that's what these reentry centers are about, to get to those people that we would never gotten to before. The other is Phelps. He mentioned Phelps. Phelps was a facility, a state facility that we closed. We're actually ramping it back up. And actually what's allowed us to do that is ICE. And ICE has 6,000 beds occupied in this state right now. And that has allowed us to do things probably we couldn't have done in some regards. But it has created some backlog and movement on a limitation of beds, but we are working on that. I feel like we can get through with that. The other thing I want to mention is LCIW, because he did mention the women's facility, or the women, is that we did get approval now. We're moving forward on a new facility, roughly $100 million for a brand new facility that will be built on, if you're familiar with the location at Hunt, it's to the left of Hunt, not to where it is now. We're moving it completely on the front side of Hunt, high ground, less dirt work and all that to do. We're saving a couple of million by moving it to that facility. But a state-of-the-art facility, I'm excited about that. You know, first time we built a state facility since 1987. So we're excited about that opportunity. We're in the designing phase. We hope to break ground in August. Probably be completed in 2022, just to kind of give you guys an update on that. So I wanted to mention that, and Captain's here today. I can't help but recognize him. He's doing a great job in Plaquemines Parish. He's representing the sheriff today. I told him we might as well go ahead and get him on this, and if the sheriff will allow us to do that, because he's a big part of what we're doing, and we appreciate you being here today and appreciate everything you're doing down there. So thank you. And with that, Senator Clayton. No, do? Yeah? No, I don't. I don't.
There you go. To probation and parole, you said you've gone from caseload of 143 to 116.
Yes, sir.
How does that compare to benchmarks of our best practices people? I know we've always been on the upper end and had too much to do. And I know from 143 to 116 sounds great, but I don't know, do we have further to go, or do we take a victory lap and say we're done?
No, absolutely not. I say we have further to go because, we were just, recently I was at a roundtable discussion with other states, and they were talking about their caseloads being in the 70s, So, and when I say average, basically, we know that we have some higher profile, some more higher risk, like our sex offenders, that we do not allow 116 in one caseload. We'll break that down, and the maximum number that we'll put in that caseload is 50, because we feel like those are the ones that need, to be watched more closely. So we have caseloads that are higher than 116. And get to be unmanageable at some point. Our original goal was 100, and that could be manageable, but we still have some
distance
ways
to go.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But
So,
it's a lot better.
Yeah, and I want to echo what the Secretary was saying on the shift in the mindset, and that, again, most of us know what's going on, but a lot of people don't, in that I guess it's not exactly right to say it this way, but once upon a time it was much easier in probation and parole just to revoke them and be done with them.
Absolutely.
I dealt with that attitude as a prosecutor, and I dealt with it as a defense lawyer, where, yeah, we're taking him off our docket. See you later. We're revoking him. And to have a mindset to where we're going to be more involved and help the folks find what they need, and saving the state of Louisiana a ton of money, and you're not getting the credit for it. So I appreciate that mindset, and know that it's a huge change to go from way over here to way over here. So, and that comes from leadership. So I appreciate what y'all are doing over there.
Yeah, so,
Thank you,
Senator,
sir.
our still main priority is to protect public safety. But what better way to protect public safety is to help people so they don't recidivate and we don't have to deal with them again later.
And I'm with you. It's all of our main goal is public safety, but we don't always take care of the public safety by doing the easiest possible thing, which is let's just revoke everybody and leave them over in prison.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Yeah, and as a reminder, 95% of them are coming home. We all know that. So you can revoke them all day long, but you're going to look at them again at some point. Okay, Judge Knight?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I guess I just want to say thank you to all of you guys. Starts at the Secretary's level, and it works its way through the ranks. I've been doing this not as long as my friend and colleague, Judge Morrison, but a long time now. And after 18 years in the business from the judge's side, I can tell you there's been a real quantum shift in the attitudes, and it's making a difference. It's making a difference in outcomes. It's making a difference in the safety of the communities. It's making a difference in the families that those individuals come from. So I commend you for your work. I think all of you, Red, Jan, Bobby, you're all doing great work, and that comes from leadership at the top. I think one of our biggest challenges over the next period of time is to see to it that we change the paradigm of 80% of our individuals being discharged from parish jails where they're getting no services. I'm a real bottom line matter of fact guy, and I can take fellows all day long. I'll be going back to Franklinton in a minute to do a 2 o'clock docket at which I have 7 pages of revocations and motions waiting for me. I can send those guys to jail. That's easy. And if I send them to parish jail with no programming, they're going to come out just like they went in, except they're going to be a little worse because jail's not a particularly positive experience for most people. So to the extent that we can change that paradigm, that's something that we need to work on. The Plaquemines project that Captain Williams is heading up is a great example of that. And I know we're doing a lot of work in that arena, and I appreciate it. With that, thanks, guys. And I hate to be rude, but I also inherited the city of Bogalusa's fiscal oversight, so I also get to see about yet another budget deficit that we'll talk about. That one's $22 million, so yeah, it's a great day. So I'm going to have to excuse myself, but thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank all of you for what you do.
Thank you, Judge Knight. We appreciate that. And again, just a little add to that is that it takes everybody working together, and we have a lot of that going on. And we appreciate the partnership that we have with the judges and the community organizations. It's all coming together. It's an exciting time.
It is.
Really is. Thank you. All right. So, no additional questions? Well, we're not. We got one. We got the community side to give us a. And then we'll. Thank you, Joe.
Hi, Nicole George, JRI Coordinator at DOC. So just to give you an update on the community incentive grant portion of it, the last funding round we commenced, we had $2.6 million to allocate, and that was to the Tier 2 parishes, so Lafayette, Calcasieu, Rapides, Ouachita, Terrebonne, Lafourche, and Bossier. We released the NOFA over the summer in June. The deadline was towards the end of July, and we scored and had an intent to award in September. We did receive one protest, so we had to stop all contract negotiations, but that was cleared up within a couple of weeks. So in October, we resumed the contract negotiations. So we received a total of 16 applications. We scored 15 because one application was received after the deadline, and we awarded 8, which is the 8 that you have in your PowerPoint slide. And as of right now, we have 4 currently at the Office of State Procurement awaiting approval. We have 1 that has completely completed the process, and we have 2 we're waiting to get back from the contractors to get their signature, and then we have 1 that we're still negotiating with. And the next 2 slides are just a brief description of the awards that we gave out, along with tentative contract dates and the parishes that received the funding. Did you had any questions on the community incentive process?
Go ahead, Kim.
Nicole, thank you for the work that y'all have done. My question is, you said there was a protest. Is that something you can share the nature of, or is that something that...
Yeah, no, I can. You want it? No, you can. No, it was pretty cut and dry. So in the application, we had that for the budget portion, you had to sign that you acknowledge that this is the budget request that you have. And the way it was written in the NOFA, it was a required signature line. And it also stated that if it was not signed, you would be disqualified. So it was pretty cut and dry. They asked if we could accept it, post the intent to award, which we couldn't, just the way we had it laid out. So unfortunately, they were not unable to receive funding, so that's why they protested.
And again, to clarify, we didn't make that determination whether or not they were ultimately disqualified. That went to DOA for evaluation.
Awesome. How many, and I'm sure you shared this already, how many applicants were there?
16. 15 that we actually scored.
Okay. And was that a decrease or increase from last year's?
Actually, it's about the same, because last year, I believe we received about 14, 15 applications.
When will we be opening the application process again?
So again, the next time would be in the third year, the round 3 savings, for the round 3 savings award. So I believe probably June of 2020, sometime around May, June of 2020. And then again, that's up to the secretary too, in terms of during each funding round, he makes a determination on, what parishes to focus on. First was the 5 parishes, second were these. And so I don't believe we've made a determination yet on the third area of focus.
Okay. At what point in the year will your office begin to start planning community engagement or town halls or best ways to disseminate the information or the ability to apply for this?
I would say probably early next year, March, April, and when we have a better idea of what region we'll be focusing on. And then we use a variety of ways to promote it, just through the normal DOC channels, our social media, through the governor's office, press release, and then, of course, some actual meetings within those parishes that he makes a determination that we'll be focusing on.
All right. And thank you, Secretary, for the work that you've done.
Well, I appreciate that, Ken, and let me add just a bit to that. In that, as we look, the rural communities have kind of gotten left out a little bit here, and that's the part that we got to focus in on this next phase, in my opinion. We're trying to grab some parishes around the centers that we're going to establish, so we do hit the rural areas. But you heard James talk about how they were, didn't have access to programming. So those are the areas that we really need to focus in on this next go around, and I know PNP knows that too. So just to kind of bring you up to date, but yeah, I think February, March, April we'll have some inkling as to what that looks like, so we can share that with you guys too.
Yeah, because we'd appreciate, Ken, if you could, touch base with you. Any promotion that y'all can do on your end would be helpful as well.
Anything, that would help. Certainly.
Certainly. The Supreme Court is at your disposal as far as information being given out. So since you're looking at more rural parishes, I know in the first tier we're looking at 5, second tier we're looking at more. So since rural has a smaller population base, we'll probably be able to reach out to a lot more parishes.
That's right.
And have a larger footprint.
That's right. That's exactly right.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, Norris.
My question was just in tier 2 funding amount, and I looked at the amounts given to different people. This was wondering why the parole project was at the bottom of that.
Well, it's actually based on their specific requests. I believe they were awarded the full amount of what they requested, so they were awarded 100%.
Correct. And that was really to fund a staff person to expand their current program out to those 7 parishes.
All right. You get what you asked for.
Yeah. Graves, good point there.
All right. That kind of clear. Did y'all have anything else?
One additional.
Had one additional.
Right up. There you go. There you go.
Yes. So another portion of the CIG funding, we carved out $300,000 to pilot a emergency and short-term transitional housing program. So with this program, it would pretty much be at PNP's disposal regarding finding suitable housing for those individuals that are currently on probation or parole at risk of homelessness. So we have 2 different buckets. You can either apply for emergency housing, which is essentially a homeless shelter, or transitional housing, which is a short-term. It's not a shelter, but it's a short-term living situation until you can find that longer-term housing. So with that, we released that pilot program, I think, at the end of October. They were due in November. So we received approximately 14 applications for that. And those are, again, our emergency shelters, our transitional housing providers. And once we vetted the application, so just to make sure they can do business with the state, they actually have, they're operating as a homeless shelter or a transitional housing provider. They're put on a referral list that will be at PNP's disposal. So as they are doing their intake from their client, they realize that they have a housing shortage, so they will reach out to providers on this list in order to get them connected with a housing opportunity. In addition, with the transitional housing piece, we are asking the housing providers to provide some sort of case management to help them get to that longer term housing, because the transitional housing piece is up to 6 months. But if there is excruciating circumstances that the person needs to stay another month or 2, we would definitely provide that coverage just to make sure that they're in a safe and decent housing opportunity until they're able to secure that longer term.
And again, just to clarify, this is a supplemental resource for probation and parole and for community assistance for people. It's on a per person basis, so it's not a specific amount awarded to each organization. It's that they've been approved, they're on the list. Probation and parole gets a client in who has a need. He'll look at the availability of these housing resources, what works best for the client in terms of the region, what's close to his place of employment, family, etc., and then work with that organization for placement, and then that organization would bill us for the number of nights of stay. So it's almost kind of like a hotel voucher situation. And again, it's a really creative idea that I think we came up with a smaller portion of funds. And so we are really excited about this. But like Nicole said, it's a pilot. So we're going to be reevaluating after the use of these dollars to see if it was indeed helpful for the client and for PMP.
Hey, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the voucher thing that you were just talking about, they've got a lot of good groups that are experienced with short-term housing, St. Vincent's de Paul's, and everybody else that does it day in and day out. So certainly use them as a resource. But as you were talking about that, it's an unpopular subject, but in the legislature, I believe we've made it to where there's no place for sex offenders. And so I don't know where we go with that, but I think the answer for most people is, how about we send them to Utah? But I mean, as a practical matter, there's no place. We've put so many restrictions on. So if y'all can solve that, more power to you. And if we can make some of these people productive and keep the community safe, good. But we've just made it impossible to put them any place other than Angola and the other facilities. So, and
you know, we not to interrupt you, but
No.
we were having a little success with our Steve Hall program with the USARPs. I think that was working pretty good, but that's kind of, I guess we've kind of eaten up the beds. I'm not sure, Rhett, y'all were involved, y'all, maybe Nicole, but it's definitely a challenge, and we continue to fight that battle on where do we have over 400 in prison right now that are held past their good time date by statute.
Yeah.
Because they have no place to go.
Yeah. And
they will full term out. They will eventually full term out to homelessness.
Yeah. Yeah. So
No, I think
good luck to the next group of guys and gals on figuring that one out.
Absolutely, Senator Claytor, you raise a very good point, and we did include that in the application with hopes that we'd get some specific to that population, and I believe 5 of the applicants did include those sex offenders as people they would service as well.
Yeah, and it's a difficult thing, but we can't. If you have cancer, if you ignore it, it's not going away.
Correct.
No, it's not. All right. The board is clear. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Do we have any public comment? All right. Any council member? Anybody? Y'all have any open discussion? All right, then. You can make sure. Yeah. Well, let me turn the mic on for you.
All right. Probably the last thing I do at the Capitol, I make a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, I'm glad to be a part of it, Senator. And we have a second by Norris. And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, guys. Have a good holiday.